It was a chilly Tuesday evening, the kind of night where the streets hum with the sound of tires cutting through the wet pavement. Jamal, a 28-year-old black man, was walking home from his late shift at the grocery store. His worn-out sneakers slapped against the sidewalk, the weight of a long day pressing on his shoulders. He tried to shake off the tension in his back, but the constant grind of life was heavy. Without warning, a pair of flashing blue lights flickered in his peripheral vision, pulling him out of his thoughts. Jamal felt his stomach knot. Another stop, he thought. It's another one of those nights. The squad car slid to a halt beside him, tires screeching slightly as if to announce its arrival. Two officers, Officer Thompson and Officer Davis, stepped out. Both had that look, the look that said they'd seen too much and expected the worst. But to Jamal, it wasn't just a look, it was the knowing. They knew who he was before he even opened his mouth. "Hey, you there," Officer Thompson barked, stepping toward him, hand on his belt. "What are you doing out here at this time of night?" Jamal didn't flinch. He'd been asked that same question too many times before. "I'm just heading home," Jamal replied, trying to keep his voice calm, not wanting to provoke them. "Home?" Officer Davis said, his voice dripping with suspicion. "You live around here?" "Yeah," Jamal answered, his heart rate picking up, but he kept his head steady. But that wasn't good enough for them. Without warning, Officer Thompson grabbed Jamal by the arm and twisted it behind his back. Jamal winced, the sting shooting up his arm as he was forced to the ground. "Why are you resisting arrest?" Officer Davis demanded, a condescending sneer curling on his lips. "We're just trying to help you stay out of trouble." Jamal was struggling to breathe now, his chest tightening as his face pressed into the cold, damp asphalt. "I'm not resisting," he choked out. "Please, I'm not doing anything wrong." They ignored him. With every passing second, Jamal's anxiety turned into rage. The weight of years of mistreatment surged through him. The unspoken rule was clear. For men like him, the truth didn't matter. They were guilty before proven innocent, judged by skin, not actions. Just as Officer Thompson pulled out his handcuffs, Jamal's mind began to race. Was this really how it was going to end? Would he, like so many before him, end up just another statistic? Another black man whose life was reduced to an interrogation on a street corner? But then something in Jamal's chest tightened, not with fear, but with determination. There was a legacy, a history in him. His ancestors fought for more than survival. They fought for justice. He couldn't let it end here, on a dirty street, under the cold light of flashing police sirens. "I swear to God, you don't know who you're messing with," Jamal said, his voice sharp. He didn't even recognize the power in his own words until they left his lips. For a moment, the officers froze. "Shut up," Officer Davis snarled, shaking his head. "You think we care who you are? You're just another thug?" Before he could finish, Jamal pulled his phone from his pocket and flicked the screen on. He quickly tapped in a name, the name that made every officer in the city stop and listen, the name that had power, influence, and the kind of history that could tear down a system if it wanted to. He hit send. Within seconds, the phone buzzed. The response was short but packed a punch. "Get off him." Officer Thompson looked down at Jamal, his eyes widening as he checked the phone number that had just flashed across the screen. His face drained of color, his fingers shaking as he pulled his hand back from Jamal's wrist. "What the hell?" Officer Davis muttered under his breath. Jamal slowly stood up, brushing dirt from his jeans. The officers took a step back, suddenly unsure of themselves, no longer wielding their power with the same confidence. "You don't know who I am, do you?" Jamal said quietly. His tone was no longer one of fear, but of something deeper, something ancestral. "I'm not just some kid you can push around." The officers were still reeling when a sleek black car rolled up to the curb. The windows lowered, revealing a stern-faced man in a tailored suit, a familiar face. Jamal's lawyer, his team of advisors, people who had spent years making sure he'd live his life without being targeted by the system built to crush him. Jamal was more than just a victim of a random encounter. He was a well-known community leader, an advocate, and the son of a prominent activist who had been fighting against police brutality for decades. His family's name was known in the circles that mattered, and the moment the officers saw that text message, they understood they had made a grave mistake. "Let him go." The lawyer's voice was firm, cold. The officers hesitated, exchanging nervous glances. Jamal watched him, a mix of anger and triumph in his chest. The world had been unfair for too long, but in this moment, just this one moment, justice was about to serve itself. With one last look at Jamal, Officer Thompson muttered a shaky apology, his voice low. "We didn't know. I'm sorry. Please." Jamal stood there, staring at him, the weight of the moment heavy on his shoulders. "I don't need your apology," Jamal said quietly, turning away. "But you'll never forget my face, and I won't forget what you did." As Jamal walked away, his body tense but his mind clear, the world seemed to pause. In that moment, the balance had shifted. He wasn't just another black man on the street. He was someone who had power. His life, his name, and his purpose had meaning. The police officers, once towering with authority, stood motionless as if they were seeing a new world for the first time. A world where their badges didn't mean everything, where their authority wasn't absolute, where the people they mistreated could rise up and make them reckon with their own ignorance. In the silence that followed, Jamal knew the truth. Power could be wielded by anyone, but it took strength, resolve, and the courage to make your voice heard, to stand your ground when the world pushed back. And as for the officers, they wouldn't just learn a lesson, they would live it every single day. Life lesson. The power of identity, justice, and resilience is unbreakable. Stand firm, speak up, and never let the system define your worth. The next morning, the weight of what happened the previous night still hung over Jamal. It wasn't just the fear, the adrenaline, or the anger he'd felt when those officers had pinned him to the ground. It was the sense that something was shifting, something bigger than just that one interaction. The world was changing, and he wasn't sure whether he was ready for it, but it had already begun. Jamal sat at his kitchen table, staring down at his phone. His family had always told him that one day he'd have to use his name, his power, to change the system. But they'd never told him how heavy that burden would be, how hard it would be to carry a legacy that wasn't just about pride, but about survival. His father, a civil rights leader, had fought for decades, but he'd always told Jamal that things wouldn't be easy, that there would be moments when the very thing that defined him would also be the thing that would put a target on his back. But last night wasn't just about his name, it was about something deeper. It was about power. The text message he'd sent to the officers had been a direct shot across the bow. It was more than a reminder of who he was. It was a reminder of what could happen when the system went unchecked. And last night, for a fleeting moment, the system had buckled under the weight of the truth. Jamal didn't want to be the one to make it happen. He didn't want to be a martyr. But in this world, there were only two kinds of people: those who played by the rules and those who made their own. Jamal had been forced into the latter role long ago. His phone buzzed. A message from his lawyer. "Meet me at the office at 2. We need to talk." Jamal didn't even bother to reply. He knew what this was about. The incident with the officers was not going to be swept under the rug. Jamal could feel the tension building in the air. Word would get around quickly. The higher-ups would want to contain the situation before it exploded. That meant meetings, negotiations, and ultimately the truth coming out one way or another. But what truth? That black men were still being harassed, profiled, and beaten by the very people who swore to protect them. That wasn't news. That was a story older than time. What Jamal was dealing with now was something much bigger than one altercation between him and a couple of officers. It was about power, who had it and who didn't. By 2 p.m., Jamal arrived at his lawyer's office, a sleek glass building in the downtown district. It had the sterile, impersonal feel of a place where business was conducted, not lives. The kind of place where people in suits discuss things that felt out of reach to the everyday person. Jamal always felt out of place here, but it wasn't about comfort. It was about survival. He entered the office where his lawyer, Kenneth, was already waiting for him, tapping his fingers on the edge of his desk. Kenneth was a seasoned professional, always calm, always collected. He had represented Jamal's family for years, handling the kinds of cases that no one else wanted to touch. "Jamal, I'm glad you came," Kenneth said, standing to shake his hand. "Please sit." Jamal took a seat, his body still tense from the events of the morning. He had barely slept, his mind racing with thoughts of what was coming next. "Here's the thing," Kenneth started, settling into his chair. "You've caused quite a stir. The video from last night is already circulating online. We've seen a significant uptick in people asking questions. The local news is already running with it." Jamal frowned. "What's the point of all this, Kenneth? You know how these things go. They'll sweep it under the rug eventually." Kenneth's expression hardened. "This is different. This is not just another case of police brutality. This is a case that could change the whole damn narrative, and we have the opportunity to make it count." Jamal raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "The officers involved in the incident last night, Thompson and Davis, are already under investigation," Kenneth continued. "But I'm talking about more than that. This isn't just about them. This is about systemic corruption, Jamal. This is about using your platform, your voice, and your family's influence to bring this to light in a way that could force real change." Jamal's mind raced. He had never wanted to be the face of a movement. His father had always carried that mantle. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized Kenneth was right. If he stayed silent, if he let this go, it would be just another story swept under the rug. Another story of black men being forgotten in the face of systemic violence. But if he used his voice, if he used his name, he could change everything. "Are you ready for this?" Kenneth asked, his voice low. Jamal leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes for a moment. It felt like the weight of the world was on his shoulders, but he knew one thing for sure. It wasn't just his burden to bear anymore. It was time for action. "I'm ready," Jamal said quietly, his voice firm. Kenneth nodded, a slight smile creeping onto his face. "Good. We'll get the press involved. We'll use the video, the footage, everything. But you need to prepare yourself. There's going to be backlash. There will be people who try to discredit you, to discredit your family. This will not be easy." Jamal looked out the window, his gaze drifting toward the skyline. "I've been living with fear my whole life. Fear of what could happen if I spoke up. Fear of what might happen if I got too loud. But last night," he turned back to Kenneth, his eyes burning with a new resolve. "Last night, I realized that silence is the real enemy. I can't afford to be silent anymore." For a moment, the mayor sat frozen. Then he stood abruptly, his face now a mix of anger and disbelief. You went behind my back?" "I did," Jamal said. "You may have control over this city, but you can't control the truth. This isn't about what you want to do, or what's easy for you. This is about the lives that have been destroyed by the system you helped build." The room felt colder now, and Jamal knew that the mayor understood the magnitude of the moment. He could no longer avoid it. There was no room for half measures. Jamal didn't wait for the mayor to say anything more. He walked out of the office, leaving the door open behind him. Weeks later, the courtroom was packed with people. The prosecution had finally built the case strong enough to take the trial. The city was divided. There were those who stood with Jamal, demanding accountability, and those who rallied behind the police, clinging to a system that had long protected its own. But Jamal knew this was bigger than just a trial. This was the moment to show everyone that the system could be held accountable, that a black man could stand up to the very institutions that had historically silenced him. He wasn't just fighting for his own dignity anymore. He was fighting for every person who had ever been unjustly treated, for every individual who had lived under the weight of oppression. The trial was tense. Officer Thompson and Officer Davis sat in their seats, their once confident expressions now grim. They knew what was coming. The evidence against them was undeniable. Jamal sat in the front row, surrounded by his family and supporters. Kenneth, his lawyer, had done an exceptional job of presenting a solid case, showing the systematic nature of police brutality and framing the incident as not just a case of misconduct, but as a pattern of behavior that needed to be addressed. When the verdict finally came, the courtroom was silent. Everyone held their breath as the judge read it aloud, guilty. The room erupted into a mixture of shock and applause. For Jamal, it wasn't just about the conviction. It was about the victory over a system that had long been stacked against him. The officers had been held accountable, but more importantly, the world had seen that the system could be changed. As Jamal stood up and walked out of the courtroom, the weight of the moment finally hit him. This wasn't just a victory for him. It was a victory for every person who had ever felt the sting of injustice. Outside the courthouse, people were gathered, cheering, clapping, and celebrating. Jamal raised his fist into the air, the crowd chanting his name. It was a feeling of triumph, of justice served. It wasn't a perfect world, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like justice had finally been served. Jamal stood on the steps of the courthouse, his heart pounding with a mixture of emotions. He'd won, but not just for himself. The officers had been held accountable, and the world had taken notice. For the first time, it felt like real change was possible. But Jamal knew this wasn't the end. There was still work to be done. The fight for justice wasn't over. It had just begun. He looked out at the crowd, feeling the weight of his father's legacy settle into his bones. The torch had been passed, and now it was his turn to carry it. And he would carry it with pride. Justice, he said aloud to no one in particular, isn't something you wait for. It's something you fight for. And with that, Jamal walked into the future, knowing that the fight was far from over. For the first time, he was no longer fighting alone. Life lesson. Change doesn't happen by waiting for it. It happens when we stand up, speak out,